Hey there, welcome back to our podcast all about apps. It's what we talk about. It is our obsession. And today's episode, no different. It's going to be a real eye-opener as we tackle the topic of leveraging data to combat ad fraud in mobile user acquisition. That is a complex topic, so we're going to come at it from a couple different angles, and it couldn't come at a better time because here we are. We're gearing up for Q3. We're looking ahead to Q4. We want to get more strategic about maximizing mobile game performance, and we want to get serious and down to work as well, which is why we have a panel of experts to do it, because they share their experiences to make sure you literally are getting what you pay for out there, because that's what it's about in mobile UA. It's about getting valuable users and players from the get-go. So we want to get going as well. So let's get to know our guests better. We have, of course, my partner in crime, my co-host, Faheem Saiyad, director at App Samurai. Been with App Samurai since the start. I have to say, you're a voice, you're a force in the industry, Faheem, and good to have you here as well. And you've got your moves, right? You move around the industry. We've seen you. I've just seen you at an event recently, and we can't forget that blue belt in jiu-jitsu makes you a force in the industry indeed. So here he is, the man Faheem. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Peggy. It's always a pleasure to be on the podcast with you. You know, all those talk shows, all those interviews, all those events. It's always fun with you, Peggy. Thank you for having me.
We are adrenaline in person here. This is true. Everywhere. And some new faces, old faces as well. We get a little bit of both. We also have Cansu Ağaoğlu. She is at Adjust, where she directs the Central Europe sales team, all about driving strategic growth and performance there. And hey, Cansu, you have also had 10 years in mobile marketing, and I know from your colleagues you are consistently and deeply committed to evolving with the industry, and you're on watch for new knowledge, new innovations. That's why it's a match coming here, because this is where you're going to have a bit of both. And the hunt continues, because outside of work, well, Cansu loves to explore the world and capture its beauty through photography. It's the art and science of marketing here. Welcome, Cansu. Great to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really thrilled to start this conversation. It's quite interesting, and I want to hear different perspectives.
Well, you certainly are, because our third guest, and we have a practitioner and a thought leader, indeed, because she is out there making the rounds, giving presentations. We're here to learn today from Deniz Kekeç. She is performance marketing manager at InnoGames, a seasoned marketer with 8 years, I'll do the pun, under her belt, Faheem, blending engineering precision and marketing flair. So bringing those worlds together. And because of that, well, she's crafted and executed winning strategies across diverse platforms. She thrives on data-driven approaches. That's why she's here. And she has a global perspective as well, sharpened by living and working in 5 different countries. Now at InnoGames, she's spearheaded performance channels, collaborative projects, and she's all about boosting measurable performance gains. And outside the office, well, Deniz is all about balance, because she's a certified yoga teacher who loves to run, embrace the great outdoors. I think she needs to get together with you, Cansu. And with all of you together, we're going to learn how to balance a different kind of balance, because it's balancing short-term wins with long-term profitable growth. Deniz, that's where you are a master. Welcome. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. All type of conversation in any platform, I enjoy it deeply, and I believe it's going to be the great one too.
It is. We have been on a bit of a roll, actually. It's not the first time I'm connecting with you, and every time it's interesting. And we're going to do that because you have a new project to share with us today as well. So let's start there. We know already, you know very well, it's not just about acquiring users, players. You want to achieve sustainable growth. And to do that, you need a different mindset. You need to look at the full funnel. So for you, Deniz, why now? I mean, what is different? What are the main differences between traditional UA, the way we used to know it, and the more measured approach where you focus on quality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so of course, as you mentioned, that the industry has changed a lot in the last 2, 3 years. I mean, COVID was not only the 0 point for our personal lives, but it's also for the professional life. It has changed a lot of things in advertising industry too, and that's why the one of the things that I start to see around me, and also I try to evaluate in my own work too, the improving data more in marketing, and one of the not even one of the reasons, but there are multiple important reasons why we need to do that. Not only me, but the everyone in the marketing. The first, increasing competition, and I'm not only talking about gaming where I'm focusing on, but also in other industries that we do see there are more brands and there are more ad networks as well in marketing that we can just compete and try to test if it has a valuable user for us. Other than that, changing behavior of the consumers also is us again, that the COVID also shaped our consumers' behaviors. And the lastly, of course, the market situation. It's very tricky. It's very challenging. And that's being said, that in marketing, from my understanding and how I evaluate my work too, we need to include data, because now the marketing is not only about user acquisition, but also understanding the session behavior of the users that we acquired for our apps.
Now, you do that from two perspectives, because you have, of course, the marketing focus, but you have an engineering background. So how does that help you? How does that differ in how you approach the complexities of ad fraud detection and also, the signs of ad fraud?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the ad fraud is of course the only one part of the data, but as an engineering who studied a lot of numbers and statistics in the university, what I do know and what I do keep reminding myself, that we are working with predictive models. Speaking of course, gaming or also the subscription apps, right? The reason that we are working with the predictive models depends on the product that you're working. The lifetime can be 1 year, lifetime can be 6 months, or lifetime can be even 3-4 years, right? And that means that in marketing, every data we put in, that it's estimated for some time lifetime, and we have to rely on the answer. But it can be tricky. Imagine that I'm acquiring a user from day 0, and next year I'm seeing that actually that user was not valuable. And in marketing, we tend to forget that we are working with longer lifetime. So it's not only about installation, but we need to also see how that user in reality, not based on prediction, but in reality worked for us. And knowing that data is always important for marketers. And I guess for marketers also, they need to have more consciousness that they're working with the predictive model, and they need to compare this predictive model with the reality too.
Mm-hmm. And they also have to have a vision to understand, okay, this user may not look like the rock star we think it should be, but actually if you model it out, you're seeing that it's going to pay dividends. What's a way that we can approach the KPIs? You need to benchmark this against something, but what are some of the crucial metrics you can mention and share with us? Because it's not only LTV, it's really a more predictive model.
Mm-hmm. So of course that there are no rule of thumb here, right? Like there are multiple networks, multiple platforms that we are working, including the scan. It just makes way more complicated working with iOS topics, but just some of the KPIs that I believe is going to be useful for multiple ad networks or multiple the platforms. That of course the one big thing is the conversion rate. It can be impression to click, it can be click to install. That's very important, or it can be click the registration. And I believe 99% of the marketers are already on top of that KPI. Other than that, though, click the install, the length. So what does it mean? That like when they click on the ad and until the install, how long it passed for user. Actually, the point here is that if it's like 1 second, that you can understand first, it can be a bot, because normally every consumer, every user has some digestive session while they're looking on the App Store or the product page. It doesn't matter. And other than that, session duration, these are like after registration or after install KPIs, that what is the session of the user. If it's like remarkably short or remarkably long, that can also give an idea that that if it's something off in here, other than that retention rate, again, I believe these metrics are already looked by the marketers. But while I'm talking about retention rate, I'm talking about the stages after initial install time, which is, I'm not talking only about 30 days, but I'm also talking about 60 days or 3 months or 6 months retention rates. And lastly, I guess the one thing I can definitely recommend is net revenue development. So again, because it gives us getting out from the tunnel view, again, not only relying on the predictive view, which we can also call payback period, which means that, what is the ratio of that specific users that we acquired from that network or, any specific target, what is the quickness of that turning into the real money compared to our predictions. So I guess net revenue models are important too. But of course, I always recommend to have some benchmarks for people, which means that once you have a trustable source, have your benchmark and compare to that and define a range. There is no one single number, okay, it looks off. So based on the statistics, have your benchmarks, reliable benchmarks, and compare to those benchmark ranges.
Mm-hmm. So it's really about looking for the signs of quality, but we also want to understand, are the players real? And Jansu, that comes a bit to you, because if it's too good to be true, it usually isn't, is the saying. Let's talk about how you look at real versus fake, how you help marketers like Deniz differentiate between real and fake users when they're analyzing results.
That's a really good point, Peggy. As Deniz touched upon, we are taking this quality over quantity approach. So we are shifting towards this sustainable growth. But that's another challenge, that we need to make sure that these users are real users, so that we are not wasting our marketing budget. That's the most important thing. But the impact actually might be bigger than just wasting our marketing budget. As Deniz also mentioned, they are creating these predictive metrics. Imagine your data is going to be spoiled. This is how you are creating your strategy, how you are optimizing your campaigns. So the actual impact might be way bigger than just a marketing budget. So just to give you a quick overview, I want to share some numbers with you in terms of when we are talking about ad fraud, what is the scope? The total cost of ad fraud in 2022, which also includes mobile ad fraud, by the way, it was 81 billion, which is a huge number. And it was predicted to increase to 100 billion by end of 2023. So it's a big industry for fraudsters. Of course, they are always trying to find an alternative methodology just to steal our marketing budget. And as solution providers, developers, they are trying to fight against this new fraud tactics, right? But it will require this constant monitoring. So we need to have this data collection frameworks in place, so we can make sure that we are analyzing data constantly and we are staying on top of this competition. And when it comes to fake engagements, for instance, in some vulnerable markets, they can account for 20 to 30% of overall traffic. So this is also quite alarming, actually. Mm-hmm. But there are different types of frauds, and it needs to be addressed separately. So we will be also talking about different types of metrics, just in order to identify these fraudulent activities. The first one is fake engagements, which is also called click spamming, for instance. It's a form of mobile ad fraud where these fraudsters, they are executing fake clicks without the user's knowledge or consent. So end user, they are not clicking on anything. Those are just scripted clicks. They are hoping that the end user will download your app, and finally they will take credit. And another form of this fake engagements, it could be click injections, which can specifically for Android devices, because there is this capability. Fraudsters, they can find out which app is being installed for that specific device, and right before install, they can just inject one click activity. And they can take the credit. That's the whole point. And when it comes to metrics, we can look into to identify this fake engagements. The first one is quite simple, actually, but it's quite effective as well. Click-through rate, CTR. And the reason why, most of the time we track clicks, but we don't track impressions. It might be arising from different type of ad placements, but I would always recommend keep tracking impression numbers. And the reason why, if they are faking these click activities, they need to make 10 times more effort to fake impressions, so that we are just creating this another layer of protection. And the second one could be conversion rate, right? Similar to CTR. If we don't have access to impression numbers, what we can analyze is click to install rate. So what we are seeing, if it's a click spamming activity, first of all, you will monitor unrealistically high number of clicks, right? Because they are not paying anything for these click activities. There might be some examples like campaign is active in Germany. In the last 3 days, they are reaching 70 million clicks, which is humanly not possible. And the conversion rate will be quite low. So as Deniz mentioned, we can create this benchmarks and we can compare to this industry benchmarks. We can create some alert notification systems so that we can also automate this process. We can get notified and we can take actions accordingly. And another one, time to install. This is also quite important and super useful metric to monitor time between this click and app installation, which could address this click injections as well, since you will be seeing this really short period of time between this click activity and install activity, because the user has already started downloading your app. They are just injecting click right before install. So those are the metrics we can look into. And we can look for some irregular download patterns, for instance, or if there is any spike in traffic. So we can incorporate these strategies and we can pay close attention for the specific metrics. And the second type of fraud, fake installs, which is also called SDK spoofing. And what we have seen so far, click spamming was one of the most common type of ad fraud. And nowadays, we are also seeing increasing activity for SDK spoofing. SDK spoofing, these fraudsters, they are creating these fake installs, fake engagements, leveraging real device data, which makes it almost impossible to identify this fraud type because they are leveraging this real device data. So overall, what we need to do here is, since SDK spoofing is a quite sophisticated form of ad fraud, right? So we need to implement some certain fraud prevention technology, not just for detect, but also prevent these fraudulent activities. And we need to do this regular auditing our marketing campaigns, analyzing traffic. I truly believe in transparency. So if you can share this data with your partners, they can also take actions proactively. And lastly, we need to educate our teams, marketing teams, product teams, so that they can be also aware of what are the latest fraud tactics, for instance, and they can come up with some specific solutions.
Mm-hmm. So we're hearing that it's very much now top of the agenda with people like you, Deniz. You know, it's a part of a data-driven strategy to understand just exactly how malicious actors can quite literally game the system and gain mobile users, which is expensive. That is something you don't want to be losing at, and you can lose money on it. Now, Faheem, you're looking at it differently because you're a provider of a rewards-based model, such as rewarded playtime, offer walls. So you have a view into the tactics that actors are using. So maybe just walk us through some of the more ingenious, even frightening tactics you've seen recently that they're able to, that fake is looking real.
Yeah. One thing that both Deniz and Cansu touched on is right. The basic aspects. Since the industry is massive, it's very easy to earn money by being a fraudster. That's the sad reality we live in. It's easy money. I mean, recently there was a published report where somebody in Hong Kong, if I'm not wrong, was arrested for spamming an e-commerce advertiser for over $500,000 just by setting up a device farm that had over 100,000 different devices, and the videos were just being played on. So for the advertiser, these were streams that were being counted as users, but on the back end of it was just a big device farm, right? Same thing goes for kind of, emulators. You can just set up a room full of emulators and you can make them download the app one by one, play certain levels, and then just be done with it. Since the advertiser would track these metrics as installs and clicks, it's just such a perfect pattern that not until those long-term LTVs that Deniz mentioned, right, the day 30 and day 60, once they don't start to make sense, you turn back and you realize that, all right, you might have day 7 LTV, but by the time those day 30 came, those emulators were reset again, and they were starting off for a different advertiser. So those advertisers never came into you. Those users were never yours to begin with, but you had paid a hefty sum of amount for these as well. And what we have seen is a lot of hyper casual and hybrid casual games. They are doing a lot of, to avoid paying for fraud, they moved to the cost per engagement, where they were started to set up these multi-event models, where depending on the different levels of a game, they wanted to reward the user. Now, as App Samurai, we have been in business for 8 years, and we have our own Playtime SDKs, our own offer walls, our own apps. So we have seen the ins and outs of it, right? So what we started to see was this did work initially, but then came a time where, as Cansu mentioned, the offer walls started being spoofed, because the reward that user would get for completing a certain level that takes 35 hours is a massive reward, right? So they start to deflate those scripts. They start to do SDK spoofing. So again, on the attribution tool, sometimes you would see it as an install, as an event, right? And the user would get the reward based on the post back. But when the advertiser is like, hey, this data doesn't exist on my backend, right? How did this get attributed? By the time the reward has been given, the user has gone away, right? So then you start to kind of, set up these basic fraud metrics that you have on the attribution tools or internal tools as well, to see if the click IP matches the install IP, if the install came from a VPN, etc. as well. So this was the aspect where, these multi-event campaigns started to spoof off. Then we moved to a place called the rewarded playtime, where the user was being rewarded per each install. Now, this is a campaign type that works specifically for games that are monetizing via in-app purchases. So the casual games, mid-core games, and hardcore games is where this kind of campaign works. Now, as somebody that offers SDKs for these solutions for rewarded playtime, since the reward is given out on an install, the intent is genuine. So because we have a community of gamers that will earn when they play. So that's when they know that if I install as a fake user, they won't get any reward, because they need to play certain time to basically get the rewards done as well. So in the industry, we started seeing that these players started to kind of compete with each other on who has the maximum playtime, because the more they play, the longer the LTV of this mid-core or the casual games comes out as well. On our side, we started doing something that not many people in the industry do, is because the reward playtime space is still very niche. We started doing something called as user scoring. So what we saw was certain users. Now, this is not fraud. This is human mind, right? The human mind wants to earn more money. You open a game and you just keep your phone on charging idle. So the game is running. So, that still appears as engagement time. But since the user was never playing those levels, those events never hit. But the user says, hey, I was engaging with the game. Now, this can make sense if the advertiser has some sort of advertising revenue matched to it as well. But for casual and mid-core games, you want the user to purchase and basically unlock those levels as well. So we're like, oh, this is not fraud, this is user manipulation. So we started optimizing those users, and we came up with a new feature where we reward the user depending on their score. So we have a whole setup of aspect where the more the user plays, the more events they unlock, we score them. So if I know that X user has a really high trustworthy score, like it's a 90% plus trustable score, you can give them a higher reward. And if a user is just inflating their numbers, I give them a lower reward, because they are a genuine user. They might still watch those genuine ads, right? So that's how we saw an industry where, on the offer walls, doing SDK spoofing to click injection, to moving on and the users trying to manipulate it, and then moving on to the rewarded playtime, where we saw that, the acquisition channel matters as well. So the rewarded app, which is acting as a publisher, they need to ensure that they are actually doing qualified user acquisition. They are leveraging channels like Meta and Google, because then you have qualified users. So when you monetize and when you show the ad for a game, the users are actually well engaged. So this is where we saw the industry shift from kind of, spoofing events, manipulating click install CTRs, to basically the users trying to earn more rewards, enable VPNs, a user in a tier 3 country, enabling a VPN and watching an ad from a tier 1 country. Now, since the eCPM of a tier 1 country is significantly higher, the reward is based on a higher payout, but the user actually saw the ad from a tier 3 country. So these are some shams that are still going on. And as Deniz and Cansu mentioned, it's an evolving industry. There will never be a world where there is no ad fraud. It's impossible, because again, it's a $200 billion industry, right? You can't have that just vanish out of thin air. So that's where kind of, everybody needs to collaborate and scale on and learn from each other.
It's true. It will always be there. But to your point, Faheem, it requires collaboration. You have to understand what are the tricks that they're using to bypass detection systems. You've shared some of those. We've heard also from Deniz some of the metrics that she's looking at, and also Cansu, how to distinguish fake from real. So it's really all about teamwork. That's what I'm hearing here. It's like what happens, and this show is an example of that. What happens when you have the right people in the room at the right time. So you need that to detect and fight ad fraud. It's very complicated. It's full funnel. It's also not focused on just the install. So Deniz, I'll start with you. What does good teamwork look like at InnoGames to combat ad fraud in mobile UA, but also, to some extent, predict? So it's not just about combating it, it's about avoiding it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you mentioned, fraud is quite a complex topic. So it's not a job that one person can do. So there are multiple people who has a different expertise in this topic, which in InnoGames, especially in the last years, that we are putting quite a significant effort there, such as the more collaboration definitely between analytics and the marketing team. So we do have dedicated colleagues from the analytics team that working for marketing department, because again, as I mentioned, that in InnoGames that we are also working with so many ad networks. So it's crucial to have a common platform for us to understand how these KPIs, or even more to them, depends on the product, that how they changes or differs from ad network to ad network. So I guess one of the things that we had definitely this collaboration between analytics and marketing, and having a common ground that's where both sides can work together and understand the data together.
Mm-hmm. So it's more about that collaboration and building on that foundation. But of course, another person at the table, another member of the team, it's not complete anymore these days without discussing AI. So what does that collaboration look like? Because of course, AI is great at looking at patterns. It's great at also increasingly predictions. So how do you think it's going to fit in? How do you think it's going to transform fraud detection, prevention, and looking at those signs of fake users in the gaming industry and beyond?
So of course the AI is still a new topic, that there are still a lot to learn about that. It's kind of a very hot topic that there's a lot of areas to work, but nobody knows how to start to work with it, right? But from my personal observation about the AI, I guess the easier thing, or the one thing that it can contribute to data or the fraud, that the writing the automated scripts, which is going to allow marketers to have the signals earlier before the manual workload putting into there. I guess that would be the machine learning or AI can significantly contribute to this data area, because again, regardless of the whatever dashboard you're going to do, that it requires a lot of actually human work, human effort. And I believe that these automated scripts or automated reportings or automated signals is going to help us to put our efforts in different area, while we are just going to trust the models to let us know or alert us before things get too severe.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Deniz mentioned as well, right? AI is a model still in training as well. So the aspect of it where you would still need an experienced marketer to actually make sense of what this data is. Because as I mentioned, right, not every fraud is actually fraud. Sometimes the end user that is actually a genuine user is just trying to get a higher reward or manipulate it. They could in turn be a genuine user, for example, right? So for example, when we offer our SDKs out to the publishers, right, we do offer things like, face verifications and OTP. So the user has to go through this and enter that. And then the model runs and decides, okay, these users are actually genuine. And then it's on the marketer to actually be like, all right, now it makes sense to build up a cohort as well. So I think AI models will always be a certain boost that marketers would need. But at the end, I think, as Deniz mentioned, right, the experience of a marketer is something that will still, in today's world at least, hold a massive significance. You cannot just set up everything on an AI model to detect fraud and prevent fraud and build out the data set for you and continue to succeed on building a game. So that human touch of it, when combined with AI, I think that is the sweet spot that we all need to be in, at least for the coming years. Things could change overnight. Every time, Sam Altman goes and does an open AI demo, things change. But at least in the current scenario of things, I think we are quite safe on this front.
It is a moving target, but you make a great point, is that, some of it is just a human trying to get more out of the system. It's not necessarily that malevolent, malicious actor. It's just something sort of within the confines of what you expect in player behavior. And you have to understand that too. But to your point also, it requires that teamwork, not just within the company, in Deniz's case, with the team working, engineering and marketing, but also the players in the industry. So Faheem, maybe I'll close with you. You brought it up. Maybe it's not Sam Altman who needs to be here at the table, but different players in the industry do have to come together to focus on this. How can they do that? What do they need to work on first?
And I think one thing that you did mention, Peggy, right, and I think this is this talk show kind of holds the same signal as well, is that the collaboration that we have seen in recent years is changing dynamically. There was a time where once the advertiser implements an attribution tool and they start running the campaigns, there would not be a bridge between anybody, right? It was just, hey, okay, the MMP is set, you start the campaigns, what's coming at the end of the month gets paid, right? But these days, a lot of our active advertisers, one of the biggest ones that are into casual and mid-core games, we are in touch with their attribution tools account manager as well. We are in touch with their, marketing team as well. The idea here is because not everything is going to be fraud free. There is going to be, good sources, bad source optimization. So in today's world, we are seeing much more collaboration where we, as a rewarded placement, are working with the advertiser who has an app and then the attribution partner that they are using, because everybody has certain insights, everybody has certain data. And once you merge all of it together, only then it's fruitful, because nobody here wants to kind of, gain something or more than the other. It's everybody trying for the same purpose as well. If the data is fine, the advertiser is happy from the attribution tool. If the advertiser is happy from the attribution tool, that is kind of, attributing users from a certain game, for example, they're happy with the network or the channel that they're using as well. It's a win-win for us, because anytime that bridge breaks, you would have, a whole length of kind of, deductions and cutting off the partnerships and finding a new vendor and all those things. So that's why kind of, I think collaboration is key, and we are seeing it quite actively, no matter big or small game that is in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been a great show. We do have to bring it to a close. A great talk show. Deniz, you have been inspiring, maybe also inspiring our audience to develop a more data-driven strategy to detect and combat ad fraud. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for having me here again. I'm also happy to build more consciousness on this topic. Again, not only fraud, but more data and how marketers need to be more involved in data part too.
Well, you are data-driven. I think it's contagious, because I want to hear more about it. Maybe we will actually have you back as this project evolves. Cansu, exactly the same. Thank you also for sharing, and also a little lift and a look under the hood at the different types of ad fraud that we need to be thinking about. And of course, Faheem, always for making this a balanced and fast-moving conversation. So thank you, and thank you out there as well. Thanks for listening. If you're tuning into the podcast or watching, if you're checking out the video podcast, of course, conversation does not stop here. You can listen in for more by subscribing to All About Apps on YouTube and Spotify, and we'll look forward to the next in the series. And until then, we will continue our talk all about apps. Thanks so much.